All right, good morning, folks. Thanks everybody for joining us again here today. Hopefully you were able to make our kickoff webinar yesterday for the MiEnviro training series. So if you were able to join us, welcome back. You are here today for the first session for our Permit to Install sub-mini series of that Permit to Install Part 1, the Introduction to the PTI Submission Package. My name is Caitlin DeVries. I am the Air Quality Outreach Specialist for Eagle's Environmental Support Division, and I'll be here moderating today's training session, as well as a lot of the other sessions that will be going on over the course of the next few weeks. We do have several staff on the line to walk us through today, but before I get to those introductions, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. So before we get into the content that we're going to be covering today, the housekeeping items that I'd like to cover is that first off, all of our lines will be muted and will remain muted throughout today's training session. I also want to let you know that we are recording this training and we will post the recording to our webpage, which we will show you in just a few minutes on where to access that. We'll also be sending out the slides in conjunction with the recording. So you will have access to today's slides in case you want to go back and re-review that information as well. And lastly, we do have time built in for question and answers. So if you do have a question as we go along, please go ahead and type those questions into the question and answer box located at the bottom of your screen in your Zoom toolbar. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can throughout today's session, or hang on to them if we can't get them into some of the later sessions. So I want to go ahead and introduce the two staff that will be leading today's training. So we are lucky to have two of our permit section engineers on for today. So Lauren and Janelle, if you guys want to turn your cameras on. We've got Lauren McGurl, who is a senior environmental engineer, and Janelle Trohill, who is an environmental engineer specialist. We also have online Dave Thompson from our permit section as well. He is on here to help assist with question and answers. You'll be hearing from him in some later sessions. We also have on the line staff from our data applications and technical support unit that we heard from yesterday. So before I pass it over to Lauren, I do want to quickly clarify a couple things that we got some questions on yesterday about the air and water sides of MiEnviro. So MiEnviro portal is one system which has air and water both in it. So your user account, if you already have one for water and you don't have one for air, will work for your air site. So you don't need to create another account. You just need to get connected to your air site in order to get to be able to do work on your site in air. If you need access to your air site in MiEnviro, you can be granted access by one of your colleagues who maybe already has access to your air site. Amy covered that in yesterday's training, and we also have information on how to do that posted on our website. Or you may be someone who's waiting for that verification code because you have an air permit with us, but you're not required to report emissions. So you haven't done any work in the MiEnviro system for air prior to going live yesterday. That verification code will get you connected to your site. However, if you have never done business with air or water or anything in MiEnviro, if you need help with getting connected to your site, getting an account, go ahead and create an account, and then you can contact our eagle-air-MiEnviro@michigan.gov, and we will help you out to get access. So hopefully that helps. For those of you who have some questions about both the air and the water sides of the system. Lauren, I think we are ready for you to go ahead and take it away and get us into today's agenda.
Perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. As my screen starts to share. Good morning. I'm Lauren McGurl, a senior environmental engineer in the general manufacturing unit of the permit section. Thank you for attending the first of 4 MiEnviro portal trainings for permit to installs, or PTIs. Today, we will discuss the introduction to a PTI submission package. We're going to go over what is a new versus existing site within MiEnviro, discuss submission packages for new permits, as well as modify permits that will replace our current paper application form. How to start a PTI submission package for a new permit, how to navigate a PTI submission package, and then Janelle's going to go over the application equipment inventory form. Before we get started in the live system, we want to cover a couple of topics and definitions. Within MiEnviro, the submission package will be available to the public. So what will be available is all application forms and non-confidential attachments. These will go public shortly after the permit engineer has been assigned to the submission and accepts it. Other items include the permit engineer's evaluation document. This is a document that supports the conditions and the review that was conducted. And final conditions, as well as any letters the AQD would send through the system. This could include an approval, denial, or withdrawal letter of your permit or application, as well as any additional information requests that we believe need to be done in a letter form, or any extension requests as well. Those would all be available to the public. So it's very important to upload any confidential attachments to the confidential attachment box and label them correctly. I will go over this in the live view and show you exactly where to put the confidential files and how to label them. I do want to point out too that our attachment files can take lots of different types of documents. So if you add a Word or Excel document to the attachment files, these files will be converted to PDF for the public to view. So it will not be a working document, it'll just be a PDF of the information that has been submitted. However, you also have an option to attach a zip file. In the files within your zip file, if they are Word or Excel, will not be converted to a PDF, so they will be those active files that people can look around with more versus a PDF. So we wanted to point that out so everyone understands. So let's go over some definitions since this is all new to us. As I mentioned, we'll have a submission package within MiEnviro instead of our paper application form. So what is a submission package? What is this going to look like for us? A submission package has multiple forms included in it. There are 2 required forms for all PTIs. We have a primary form and an application equipment inventory form, or as we may call it, the AEI form for short. And then there's several as-needed forms, including equipment-specific and control device-specific forms. There's a way to request a construction waiver, a part of your package, and we have a miscellaneous form. We will discuss the primary form in more detail on the next slide, but for the miscellaneous form, this form would actually be used after you submit your submission package because you have an option to withdraw the application. So if that's an option that you want to do and no longer move forward with the project, that option is available to you at any time. And that miscellaneous form also allows you to extend the timeline to review an application. So if we are bumping up against our timelines we have in our rules, we could use this form to extend that. And we're going to go over these forms in more detail in the next training. This morning, we're going to focus on the primary form and the AEI form. So who can start a submission package? Anyone with an editor or administrative role can start a submission package. As Amy stated yesterday, she showed how to set people up with roles. So an editor or administrative role can start a submission package. They can fill out any form within the submission package, and they can stage the equipment-specific and control device-specific forms. A person must have approved certifier status to stage the primary and the AEI form. I'll talk about what staging means and how to stage forms this afternoon. So how do I get certifier status and who can get it? The requirements for certifier status are not changing with MiEnviro for the AQD. It must be a direct employee of the site, and they must have access to the site. AQD does not allow consultants to have certifier status. To get certifier status with MiEnviro, you must download and fill out the certifier status request form and mail it to the AQD. There's guidance and more information on this on the MiEnviro Air webpage, and I'll point this out how to access that webpage once we go live. I know this is a lot of brand new information, so I wanted to let you know these slides will be available, and I will point out where the updated PTI user guide is currently on the website. So it is live right now. As I promised, we'll go over the primary forms. There are two different submission packages. We have one for a new permit and one for a modification of existing permit. They each have a primary form. The new permit has a permit to install new permit form, and the modifications primary form is the modification of existing permit. These forms will be the first form within your submission package. And remember, they are required to submit a submission package. So what is a primary form? We mentioned it a couple of times. This form houses the majority of the application, and it tells the AQD what the application is for and the type of review that needs to be conducted. We will walk through the new permit submission package today, specifically the primary form. But first, we need to know, or you guys need to know which one to use. So before we can do that, we need to go over one of the new permit statuses. In effect. So in effect means you currently are operating under the PTI. But if you are a major Title V or an ROP source, if that PTI has been rolled into the ROP, that PTI will no longer have that in effect status. It will have a status terminated or rolled into ROP. Again, we're going to go over this more, these statuses, this afternoon, but this one is important to understand which submission package to use. So for a piece of new equipment, or if you are a brand new facility, the new permit submission package should be used. This will create a new permit number. The new permit submission package should be used for any piece of equipment as well if it doesn't have an in effect permit to install status. So if you're modifying a piece of equipment that's been rolled into your ROP, it will no longer have that in effect, and a new permit submission package should be used. If you're proposing to modify a piece of equipment that is operating under an in effect permit status, the modification of existing permit submission package should be used. This will create a modification permit number. And we wanted to point out, if you're wanting to install and modify a piece of equipment in the same project, as long as you have that in effect permit status, please use that modify submission package. Again, that will create a modification permit number. And we will discuss permitting number more this afternoon and how they're going to look in the system.
Thanks for covering those definitions, Lauren. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of that in regard to those different permit statuses. We talked a little bit about verification codes yesterday during our session, and I know there was some questions that were coming into our email inbox about people receiving a verification code that may be a little bit confused about that. So some of you received those verification codes since you have not done business with the Air Quality Division in MiEnviro prior to yesterday. So you received that verification code because our legacy system said you had an in effect permit. And Lauren just talked about what an in effect permit means. However, if you don't believe that that was accurate and you don't have an in effect permit, to fix this, you're going to want to create a user account and get connected to your site. You can then go in there and request that permit to be voided. Lauren is going to cover permit voids in our part 2 session this afternoon. And this would be the correct, best way for you to void out that permit if you think you received that verification code in error. It also allows you while you're in there to see the legacy data that we have for your site, as that legacy data will be available for the public to view. Alternatively, if you for some reason can't get connected to your site, you can contact your local district office and we can help you out with that process. So Lauren, back to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. We have a couple more definitions that we would like to go over. So we have our application equipment inventory form, or the AEI form. This contains the master facility inventory. If your facility is required to submit annual emissions, this will look very similar to the annual emissions reporting. Again, this form is required to submit a submission package. This form is used to update equipment if it's being modified, or you can also add new equipment that's being a part of the project. Janelle's going to go over this form in more detail on the second half of this training this morning. We also have equipment specific and control device specific forms. These forms are as needed, and you are not required to submit them to submit a submission package. However, if you are installing or modifying a piece of equipment or control device, it is expected that the applicant uses these forms. If they are not included when they should have been, your submission package may be rejected. These forms were developed to help the permit engineer gather as much information as possible so we can start our submission review. Again, we're going to go over these forms in more detail this afternoon. As we have talked about new sites versus existing sites within MiEnviro for the AQD, a new site is a site that's never done business with the AQD. An existing site is a site that's done business with the AQD. This would include permit to install applications, or permit to install permits, ROPs, in any inspections, and annual reporting. Towards the end of today, I will show how to set up a new site within MiEnviro with our form for AQD. So as we work through forms within a submission packages, you will see different statuses. So I want to go over these before we start the live view this morning. So we have not started. This means the form has not been started. There's draft. This form has been started, but it has not been completed. I want to point out draft forms as well as not started forms will not be submitted when a submission package is submitted. And then staged. This form, or this status, means the form has been completed and it's ready to be submitted with your submission package. All forms that you want to submit must have the staged status. Next, I'm going to start the live view and show where to find the PTI guidebook and additional information before starting a submission package for a new permit. So now we're in our live view. We have, I want to point out a couple of things. I have already signed in as an external user, like you guys would be. Here you can see the site name that I have access to that site, and then some different functional areas over here on the left-hand navigation pane. But first, as I promised, we would point out where the PTI guidebook and additional supporting information is. And one easy way to get there is just click this About link. This is going to open up a new tab and take you to the MiEnviro portal webpage for Eagle. So I'm going to click the About link. And as I stated, this is for all of MiEnviro portal, so not just air. So to get to the air section, we just have to scroll a little bit. There's some other information here that might help as well if you have some questions. So down here, we have MiEnviro portal for air. So if you click this button, it will take you to the web page for air. So I clicked that, and here you can see the web page that has been set up just for air. We have some communications. Here we have a get started. So you can look at this PDF of managing new users. Like I stated with certifier status, there's some information there. And then because we are talking about PTIs, especially new source review permits, we are going to click down, and here you can see the different program areas. And we're going to select permitting because that's what we're talking about today. But I want to point out there are the different permitting areas to get more information. So I'm going to click permitting. Is going to take us to our permitting website. So this website is not new, but it does include additional information for MiEnviro. So I'm going to scroll down. It does talk about our different permitting we have. So today, like I stated, permit to install, new source review. I'm going to select this link and then scroll down just a little bit. And here you can see all of the user guides that we have out there. So today I'm not going to walk through verbatim, but we have the Michigan Permit to Install guidebook. If you want to look at that, now come back to it. But this will walk you through how to use MiEnviro portal for permit to install, as well as giving you some background information on PTIs. And we have some other ones as well. So I wanted to point that out before we got started. Caitlin, if we have any questions right now, this might be a good time as I transition to the site.
Yeah, we do have a few questions that are coming in. First question that came in, you covered it a little bit earlier when you were talking about who can start the forms, but what are the user roles that can start a form in permitting? I think you said it was editor, and what other roles can start forms in permitting?
Editor and authorizer.
Okay, so can an admin start a form for permitting? Just to be clear.
That would be somebody with authorizer, or if you have certifier agreement, yes, you can start one if you are an editor or an authorizer. I believe that's what they are. Administrator. The forms, the statuses are also in the definitions, are in that manage user, that link I just had shown a little bit too. If you have questions on that, that gives a lot of details on what is an editor, what can they do.
Okay.
So that would be a good spot for that person to look as well.
Perfect. And I do think the administrator likely has more than one role if they're the administrator managing the back end. So they likely also have editor status as well. So the site administrator likely has some extra special powers, as I like to say, in the system. Couple other questions that are coming in is, I know you're going to talk about modifying an existing permit later, but maybe just a quick clarification question on that. So would the modification of an existing permit apply to modifying an existing emission unit that is an in effect permit to install? So it looks like the term equipment might be tripping people up. There's a lot of new terms there for people. So maybe if you could just give that one a little bit of a clarification.
Yeah, if you are wanting to modify an emission unit or an EU in an existing permit to install with the in effect permit status, you would use the modification, because that will create a modification number instead of a new permit number. We want to make sure that that piece of equipment is only active, or that emission unit, sorry, is only active in one permit.
Great, thank you so much. Last question, I'll have you do, because some of the other questions are coming in. I know we're going to cover here later on in the session. So I don't want to jump the gun on those. Question comes back to that certifier, the certifier form. So the question is, will we, the person is saying, have the ability, and I'm assuming they're a company, have the ability to fill out and submit the certifier form online, or does it have to be mailed in?
It has to be mailed in, and it has to have a wet signature. And I believe there's a couple signatures that are required. But again, that information is on our website.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Lauren.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we have answered some questions, we're going to get in and start a new form if you are an existing facility already in the site and you're wanting to start a new permit. So the way to do that, here you can see I'm on the home. So this section, I'm going to go down to start a new form. So I'm going to click start a new form because that's what we want to do. And here it gives you the different options that you can look at. And it kind of sorts them for you. So today we're wanting to start a new application. So I'm going to select start a new application. And this will bring up different forms that we have available to you. And the first thing I want to point out is that we do have our general permit to install applications a part of this, but we're not going to go into detail on them today. That will be discussed in January. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, as you saw, I had some words in here. This is a sticky filter that you can filter stuff by. And then once you leave the system and come back, as you saw earlier, I only had that one submission package available. So I'm going to select or type in new permit. And so here is our submission package. We have an error permit to install new permit. And to get into this, we need to say view package. So I'm going to select view package. And it will take you to the package. If you're associated with several sites, you may get a pop-up that is asks you what site that you want to access, and make sure you are selecting the correct one. So now that we're in our package, we have several different forms. Here you can see there are 25 different forms that we have. I want to point out here is our primary form. It's the very top and it's required. We're going to walk through that one in just a second. And then we have our application inventory form, which we'll talk about later this morning, and that one is required as well. And we have our as needed. I'm not going to go down to those ones because we'll cover that later. So to start a submission package, you would select begin, and that will take you to the instructions of that form. And then a submission package number will be created. So I'm going to select begin. Oh, here's the pop-up that I was discussing earlier. Sometimes it shows up here too. So I want to say select because this is the existing site I want to be in. You should never be creating a site from this page. So I'm going to select, and that will begin the form for us. As I briefly mentioned, there will be instruction pages on here with information. Here you can see this is a lot of information. Amy did a good job of stating yesterday. There's a lot of new stuff. Please make sure you're reading it and understanding it so you're answering things correctly and providing us the correct information. So the other thing I want to mention about the instruction page, there's always one every time you enter a form, and we cannot go back to that once you enter or begin form entry. So if this is information that you think you're going to want to come back to, please copy it. You can copy and paste it into a Word document. You can take screenshots of it. However, I will state that most of the information is available in the submission package or in the primary form or the other forms with the instructions. It's just grouped differently, but we are requesting that information. So I'm going to select down. This looks very similar to the back of our paper form right now, but again, that's going away and we're using MiEnviro for applications. So I'm going to select begin form entry, and that will take us into the form. And the other thing I wanted to mention, this is a testing environment, but it should look very similar to production. So with both, with our primary form, we do ask for a new site check. And this is just asking and making sure that the applicant understands that you are not starting a new site by starting this form, and that if you are a new site within MiEnviro and never done business with us, you must select the new site new air site request form, and I'll go over that later. But if you start this without having an existing site, you may lose your data and you will not be able to submit because an SRN, a state registration number, needs to be established for your site. AQD needs to approve that before you can start any additional forms. So I'm going to say, yes, I understand that. And there are a couple of ways to navigate. You can click through on the left-hand side to jump to different areas, or you can select the next section on the bottom of the section you're currently in. So I'm going to go down to site details, and this will take us to the site details. So here we have the name of our applicant, which is your site name, the address and the county. These will automatically be pre-filled and will not be editable because this should not be changing as you're an existing site. If for some reason you notice something is in here incorrectly, please reach out to us. We do ask if it's a portable site. For this testing, I'm going to say no. And next, I'm going to go down to contact information. So here, just like we ask on the paper form, is an authorized employee. So I'm just going to select my name, and I will state that this pop-up just because I'm in Edge. It's an effect of the browser. So I'm just gonna click my name here, but type it out as appropriate. And then here as well, if your mailing address is the same, or if it's different, please add it. If it's the same, you don't need to provide that information. So our paper application form right now has 2 different contact spots. So we're asking if your authorized employee is also your primary contact personnel. And if they are, you would just say yes and continue with the form. But if they're not, as we're going to show here, I'm going to click no, and you have another option to add your primary contact. This is somebody who would be able to help support us. If we have questions, we can go to them. And then you would also select if they are able to negotiate the terms and conditions of the permit. And if they are, that allows them to negotiate that on your behalf, just like our paper form is right now. There's that box that you would check. If not, then they're not able to, and the authorized employee would need to do that. The one nice thing about going to an electronic system is, as I stated, there's only 2 contacts on our paper form, and typically there's more than 2 people working on an application or that can be contacted during the review. So we do have this area where you can add additional contacts. So I'm going to say yes. And as you will see, there was additional contacts section that popped up here. So I'm going to go down to our additional contacts. And since I didn't fill out everything in that last section, you see a red X, and that means that there are required fields which have that red asterisk next to them that were not filled out. So here we have the option to add additional contacts that we can contact or we may need to contact during the review. So again, you just add their information here. I'm going to add one super fast just so you can see the functionality of some of the things that are in here. And this person is able to negotiate the terms and conditions. So we do state that. So you don't have to add additional people on your letters like some people do now, or they'll send us emails during the review. So if you have more than just those, you have a couple of ways to add additional contacts. One, you can duplicate the contacts, which will just duplicate all the information that you have provided, or you can add an additional one that will just add a blank one as we, like when we just got into this section. So I'm going to duplicate just so I can show that functionality. And here you can see the contact name, John Smith, has been added. And then again, John Smith has been added. You also have functionality up here. You can clear that information if you don't want it. You could duplicate it again and then edit as needed, or you can delete. So you have these options up here as well. As it has been stated, there's a lot of different ways to do similar actions. So I just wanted to point that out. So I'm just going to delete it since we didn't need to add somebody else. I'm going to select delete, and then we'll have a pop-up button that just says, are you sure you want to do this? And we say, okay. All right, the next section is application information. So I clicked on that. Just like our paper application right now, we have that box number 6 that asks for additional information. So you'd fill this out as you would that section. And please simply do not say see attached or similar. So for today's training, we're going to install a boiler, a coding line, and an RTO. So I'm going to put my brief description. In the user guide, there are some suggestions too, if you're having a hard time thinking of what to put there to summarize your project. Another question that we are asking is if this application is for administrative changes only. And as a reminder, administrative changes do not require new source review, and they do not change the emissions profile of the equipment. And if you select yes, you'll get a pop-up here that says it's highly recommended you discuss this proposed change with AQD prior to submitting the application. If the AQD determines that the requested changes do not consider administrative only, we may be sending in lots of correction requests back, or we may reject your application. So as sites typically do now, they reach out to us to see before they submit administrative changes. We highly suggest you do that so there's no confusion once it comes in and we are aware of the administrative change you are asking for. So as you saw, a lot of the information removed. And so there's less required information for administrative change because, again, it's not going through new source review. So we're going to say no so we can walk through the form. We do ask if you're requesting a construction waiver. And again, remember I talked about there is a construction waiver request form within the submission package. So make sure you're filling that out if that's something, because just saying yes to this is not submitting a construction waiver request to us. You have to fill out that form for it to be considered a construction waiver request. We do have some optional spots for requested construction dates or operational dates, which just can help us know if you're needing this sooner. Again, we cannot state or agree to those dates. This is not telling us that we are going to meet those, but it's letting us know. Here we have our project description. This is where the bulk of the application will be. If you think about our current paper form, and companies typically submit us additional information or project narrative, some companies call it, a lot of that information will be uploaded here. And I will talk about what information won't be later on in the review. But this is where you're going to talk about your process descriptions. What EUs are you requesting to install or control devices? How are they linked together? A regulatory discussion talking about what rules and regulations you're subject to, and as well as noting those that you're not subject to. If maybe you're an area source of HAPs, and if you're a major, you'd be subject to a niche app. That's always nice for us to understand as well. Any control technologies, your emission summaries, which would include emission factors and where you're gathering those emission factors from. And then as needed, any stack or vent discussions, especially if you don't have a vertically horizontal stack, if there's going to be a rain cap or if it's going to be vented horizontal or gooseneck, it's just nice to point those out here. So you can attach your file. And again, you can, if you're attaching a Word or an Excel document here, it would be converted to a PDF, but if it's a zip file, then they would not be converted, any files within that zip file. So you can drag or drop or choose a file. We asked for a process flow diagram as well as a site map. And then this is the very important step, is letting us know if you think you have confidential information. If you do, you would select yes, and this is very important to read and understand if it's considered confidential or public information. This goes off of our act. And if you do, it would be attached here. And each file name must begin with the word confidential. That way we understand what you're submitting as confidential. You should not be submitting confidential information anywhere else in the submission package. It should all be here. And the reason that's being is, like I stated earlier, a lot of this is going to the public right after we accept the application. And so we want to make sure that we're holding your confidential stuff confidential. So please select confidential information here. Next, we're going to go to the regulatory summary. Here you would just select which rules apply to you. You would select all or not, and then when you're selecting these, there should also be in your write-up in that process description that we just talked about in that attachment. We do also ask if you're taking any enforceable new restrictions or changing current restrictions. This lets us know what type of review that may be conducted or asking to. If you're going to be asking for an opt-out for a certain type, Title V or PSD or HAPS opt-out, it just lets us know very quickly. Again, if you're changing the status of the facility, if you are subject to PSD or PSD applicability, please select which one you're subject to. And as you saw right here, PSD applicability section did populate, and we'll walk through that. And the same thing will happen whether you select non-attainment new source review or a non-attainment new source review applicability. So we're going to say yes to those just so we can see it. And the nice thing here is that you can select which federal regulatory programs that apply to you. So we're just going to select Part 63 for a NESHAP, and they all work the same. So Part 60 will have a pop-up for Part 60 and 61 for Part 61. Here you would just select the arrow, and a searchable list will pop up with all the different subparts that are applicable to that part. So since I'm installing a boiler, we're going to say it's a major source of HAPS. So we're going to look for 5D, which is boiler mat. So we're going to select that. And here you can see you can select as many as you want. If you select clear, it's going to clear everything you have selected. So if you don't want to do that, you can just go back. And then to get out of this box, you just select outside of it. So next, we're going to talk about PSD applicability. We ask you if you're a new major source so we can understand. If you're a 100 tons per year source category, if you select yes, we're asking you to tell us which one is applicable to your site. Again, this works the same way as that box on the previous section works. If you're a nested source, you would say yes, and you would give us a description on how your source is nested. Again, tell us what your look back period is based off if you're electric utility steam generating unit. And then here we have two different PSD applicability tables. The first one is required because it has the red asterisks for all of those pollutants. This tells us what type of review has been conducted for your applicability, whether it's subject to PSD or if you just did a PSD applicability and the type of applicability that was done. So you have A to A to P, nesting, PSD, your PTE is greater than SCR, PTE is less than major source threshold. Did you do a hybrid, which means it was a combination of A to A or A to P, or maybe it's not applicable. So this dropdown looks the same for both boxes. The second one is not required because not everyone emits these, but they are still subject to PSD. As I stated a couple sections ahead of time, we do have this attachment box here that we would expect anything associated with PSD or PSD applicability analysis or netting be attached here. So this would be something that would be removed that we would not expect to see in the process description. If it is there, it's there. Most importantly, we need our information, but trying to get it to the appropriate attachment boxes is important too. So here you just drop or choose your files. You can attach multiple files, not just one, but files that are exceeding 500 megabytes in size are not allowed. And that applies to all of the attachment boxes. So next we're going to go down to the non-attainment new source review applicability. And this is going to look very similar to the PSD one. We ask if you're a new source, your look back period, and then the type of review that was conducted. Your options are going to look slightly different here, but again, all the options are the same. And just like the PSD one, our non-attainment new source review has an attachment box as well. Next, we do ask for the project potential to omit for your project. A lot of people already are supplying this to us in that narrative that's attached, so we can see what type of review that needs to be done. Here, I want to point out, this is throughout the form. There's these blue information bubbles, and here it does say that these entries are required, but if your pollutant is not expected to emit or emitted at small levels, enter 0 and make sure you are providing a reason in that process description attachment. So 0 is acceptable if that is applicable to your project. We also ask for HAPs too. And then next, we're going to go to our emission calculations and material information. Here, it's nice for the permit engineer to understand where your emission factors are coming from. This is for your whole project. So maybe you're selecting all of them, and that's okay. Just make sure to know where your AP42 emission factors, what emission unit and pollutants they're being used for in either the process description. It's always nice to have a footnote too in Excel spreadsheets for your emission calculations. So here you would attach your emission calculations files, and please make sure to do regulated pollutants as well as your toxics spreadsheet. We do have this note if you're a small business, because this is required and you're not sure how to perform the calculations, please reach out to us for guidance and we will help you. Since I'm in the general manufacturing unit, we have a lot of facilities and sites that deal with material information that we would need, safety data sheets, environmental data sheets, other information that's being supported that we need to review because you're using that information for your toxic air contaminants emission calculation. So if you say yes, an attachment box will come here, again, with lots of words on explaining what we need. And it's very important to read that and understand. So please take your time when filling this out. And here's one of the most important things is confidential information should only be submitted in the appropriate section of this application form. So you should not be attaching confidential information here if you believe it's confidential. But that box will pop up, and again, it allows multiple files in there. We know some people have very large files depending on their sites and their projects. So if you need additional attachments, just say yes, an additional box will pop up for you. Next, we're going to go down to modeling. And here we ask what type of modeling is needed. If you're subject to PSD, Rule 225, AQD 022. This is not new. If you are a minor source of Title V, we could perform your dispersion modeling for your project. However, as a caveat, it also depends on our availability, and it may add additional time to your application review if you're requesting us to do it versus us just verifying other modeling. You would attach your modeling files here, but I want to point out that you do not include terrain files or metrological files here. If we need those, we'll reach out to you. And then lastly, we have our supporting information page. So here we have some different spots that we would expect to see. As we stated, we have our equipment and control device specific forms, and a lot of those will have an additional information section that we are expecting to see on this primary form. So this is where you would attach information related to your control device, any spec sheets for the equipment or the emission units that you're installing, any other supporting information that we would need. And then here you would attach, or if you ran out of room somewhere else, you could add additional information here as well. So I am going to save our progress because our next section is the review, and we'll walk through that this afternoon. So first I'm going to say save progress, and then I'm going to exit the form. And here you can see that package number 52 has been created. And you can see that the status has now changed to draft. Now I'm going to pass it over to Janelle to talk about the application equipment inventory form.
Yeah, Lauren, before Janelle jumps in, I know she's going to share her screen here a second. I thought we could get to a couple of questions while Janelle's going. So you talked a lot about uploading those supporting documentations. So a couple questions came in about that. First question is if a company has an application that they've got several SDSs or things all together, should they separate all of those out and include them each separately as an attachment? Or can they include those all together as one attachment?
However the company would feel, it'd be fine to include those all as one attachment if you want to. It's how some of them we get right now are as well. Or if you also could zip file them. But again, if it's a zip file, they do not get converted to PDF. The files within that zip file.
Perfect. So that kind of piggybacks to another question, still sticking with uploading of documentation. So on the boxes there, you show that it does have a 500 megabyte restriction for uploads. So would using that zip file functionality be your suggestion for submitting if there's a complex application that they may have a file that is greater than 500 megabytes? Or if they can't upload it somehow, what would be your suggestion for getting that information submitted?
I would suggest either reaching out to us and asking us case by case, or I think zip files typically do compress, but again, zip files, when they go to the public, they will not be converted to PDF. So if you're worried about getting your spreadsheet, having a live spreadsheet out to the public where anyone can view it, that we've heard that as potential concerns in the past, that would remain as a Excel document if you are providing it in a zip file.
Perfect. Last thing, I'm going to pass it to Janelle because I know she's going to jump in here. And there are a lot of questions coming in about definitions of things. I know we talk a lot in acronyms in the air quality division. So if people have questions about some definitions, what things mean that are on the screen, we still do have our PTI workbook available online, which will help you with some of those definitions, as well as our air quality rules, which define some of those things like what is a nested source, what is the SER, those types of things we do have additional information and resources out there in things like our PTI workbook, which is different than our guidebook that Lauren showed you, which has very specific information on MiEnviro and how to access these forms. So that information is still out there for people to find and utilize. And then last thing I promised Janelle before I pass it over to you is there's a lot of people asking questions about making changes to an application if the air quality division is either going to reject it or request changes. We are going to talk about correction requests and how to make those changes later on. So if you ask those questions and work on that, getting to those, it's because those are coming down the road. So save those questions and we will get to them. So Janelle, whenever you are ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Caitlin. I am. All right. Now I am going to talk to you today about how to submit the application equipment inventory form. Now, if we're back on the main page for the submission package, you can see that it says here not started. So what you'll do when you get back here is click begin. And this will take you over to our reporting program called Slice. Now, all of the equipment that is in any PTI will be housed in this program. It doesn't matter if you're a reporting source or not, because the reporting sources and the equipment inventory are like looking at two different buckets. No matter what, we would have a list of all the equipment at your site if it's permitted. And if you report, you are in a different area, but it would still be based on the equipment that's in the site. So you normally want to go from left to right when filling out all of these tiles. If at any time you get into an area and you're not sure how to go back, don't push the back button. You want to use the arrow in the right upper corner here, because that will go back between the screens within Slice. So if we are going to install a boiler, we would go here. You can see that there's one boiler already there that's operating. So down in the lower right corner is an add button with a plus. You would click that and it would give you a screen that you would be able to add your new stack in. So the first thing you would have to do is give it a name of, let's say, SV Boiler New. Has a vertical type, be new boiler stack. There is a new status called pre-operating that is available for any brand new equipment that has not been installed yet, to let us know that it is brand new equipment. That way, if it's pre-operating, we don't need to worry about a status year. We would have a stack height. You would have your stack diameter, and this is in feet. Our gas exit temperature, and our flow rate. And there's a drop-down menu to the right, depending on what the units that you need are. Now you only have to do either the gas flow rate or the gas velocity, depending on which one that you have available. Now, if you go to press save to save the info, you'll see I got a validation error because there is something that still needed to be entered. And on my second tab here of location, there is a little triangle that says, or gives you an attention is needed for that site, or for that page. If you happen to know the actual latitude, longitude of your stack, which I doubt many people do, you can click this button and say that it just has the facility coordinates, which is what we're recommending currently. Click save, and now everything was successfully saved. So we will click that back arrow once, takes us back to the screen, and you can see here it's SV Boiler New, and we had that pre-operating status. If we click the back arrow again, it takes us to the main screen of all the different tiles. Now, if there is something like low NOx burners that your boiler has, or something that is inherent to the device but is still considered a control device, it would need to be added in the control device tab. Just like here, the current boiler that was in has low NOx burners. We're going to assume that our new boiler also has low NOx burners. So we will do CD low NOx 2 or low NOx new. Low NOx burners. If I can spell today. That would also be in pre-operating because it has not been installed yet. Now the control measure is a type ahead field. And these are the control codes that you would have. So if you had an oxidation catalyst on an engine, anything like that, you can start typing in and it'll find it, like low NOx burners right here. If you know the pollutants that are controlled or the percentage, you can add it here. Anything with the little red line is a required. If it's not, it's an optional. Hit save, has been updated. We go with the back arrow back to this screen for the control devices. As you can see, again, pre-operating. And the back arrow again takes us to the main tile screen. Now, if you have a control device, then you also need a control path. That means it is just how the emissions go from the control device to the exit out the stack. So as you see, there's a current one for the low NOx burners for boiler 1. So we will go and add a second one for the new boiler. I clicked add at the bottom. And this will be CP boiler new path. Within each path, you will start with a sequence number 1 always. Since this has a control device, that we have the low NOx burner CD2 was what we had. And it's 100%. If you only have one sequence, we have 100%. Again, you can also put in the controlled pollutants. Like we know low NOx burners is always NOx. You can add that here, but it's not required. We hit save at the bottom. And it says control path was successfully updated. So we will hit the back arrow here. It takes us to that control path screen where we have our current one and our new one that they're proposing. We hit the back arrow again and go back to the main screen with the tiles. Now we're on to our emission unit. Again, when we click that, it takes us to the list of what is already at our facility or what we have put in. So we have operating. We click add at the bottom. And this is where we can fill in EU boiler new. This will be a natural gas fired boiler. Boiler. This is the type ahead that this is what is already, or this is the list that you would enter of the type. So we have natural gas boiler. The description is where you would put in natural gas fired boiler. Again, it's pre-operating. If for some reason you were doing something else, wanting to shut down something, let us know about that in here, and that's where you would change it. Now in our additional information screen, there is if the unit is for electric generation. So in our case, no, because it's a boiler, but a boiler is a combustion source. So yes. Now if I hit save at the bottom, it says there was an error. One thing that is required is a design capacity if it is a combustion source or an electric generation. So we'll say that it's a 90 million BTU boiler that's going in. And again, you have a drop-down menu that you can pick what units that your capacity is in. Click save. And as we see, it was successfully updated. We can hit the back arrow here again. This takes us back to our list of what's in our equipment inventory. You see that I put pre-operating in there. And we go back again to go back to the main screen. We have the unit process, which this has our current boiler in there in the operating status. So to add our new boiler, we will click the add button at the bottom. This takes us into the unit process. So here we want to add it for the new boiler. And this is where SCC codes go in. If you know it, you can type the SCC code in here. Otherwise, there is a drop-down menu that you can go in and pick what it is. It's an external combustion. We have a boiler, natural gas, and it's between 10 and 100 million BTU. And you can see that the SCC code automatically populated in the window over here. This gets us, we have to type in our natural gas boiler. Again, we pick pre-operating because it is not installed yet. You don't have to worry about the status here, but the other part that we do have to input is the release point. So the stack that we had entered in the first tile is right here. Our control path that we entered in the third tile is here. And it's at 100% because it is the only stack that goes through. So we hit save. And now it was successfully saved. We hit the back arrow to go back again to the list. And then the back arrow to go back to the main tiles. Now, it was mentioned about flexible groups yesterday. There is a flexible groups tab, but I want to reiterate, this is not for reporting. The flexible groups tab, if you want to lump together and make a group of emission units that are all similar and have similar requirements, you would have it added in this tab. So we have 2 boilers. So we'll say it's FG boilers and natural gas fired boilers. And here we would pick the EU boiler 1 and EU boiler 2. Now, what this does is when you submit your application, permitting staff would see that you entered FG boilers. So we would know you want to lump the new boiler and the current boiler together in your permit when we start working on draft conditions and reviewing the emissions from the sources. We would review this just like we do now as the emissions together and write conditions together. So we hit save. It was saved successfully. We go back and you can see now we have FG boilers here. And we're back to our main screen. Now, when you're back here, do not try to initiate the submission until you are ready to submit your package. All right, I think that is everything other than when you want to get back to MiEnviro portal, you will click the button up here that says back to MiEnviro and it will take you back to the main screen for the submission package.
Great. Thanks for that, Janelle. There are a couple questions that came in specific to what you were walking through. So now would be, I think, a good time to answer those.
Okay.
So question came in about what if you have a shared control device for two or more pieces of equipment? How do you log the same device for each of the operating emission units, or do you have to report them separately? So maybe you could explain how if two pieces of equipment use a shared control device, could you show that?
Yeah. So say that, well, it's hard on this one. So if you have a shared control device, you would have it in here as CD baghouse, let's say. And then when you went to your, the control path, you would have each, you would have your one control path. And then when you have your unit process, this is where, when you added that extra release, you would add it into this part, that you would have your releases and your control path here. And it would be denoted on this screen of your 2 processes going to the one control device.
Great, thanks, Janelle. That really kind of ties to another question that came in about when you put in the sequence of the control devices. So question came in about if you could just give a little bit more background on sequences and when would it be appropriate to put something in sequence?
If you had where it went from one device to another in sequence, say you had 2 different control devices for particulate, of one for bigger particulate and one for smaller, that's where you would use the first sequence and the second sequence, talking about the 2 different control devices being used together.
Great, thanks for that, Janelle. Last question, really specific to what you're in, is about the names. So you were typing EU boiler new in for a lot of things. So the question came in as how easily are those names changed on that application equipment inventory form. Say you have a new boiler that's new and you want it to be called, you only have one now, but later you want to call it boiler 2. Is that something that can easily be changed, or do the names get kind of set in stone once you've picked one? What would happen if you need to change a name of a emission unit?
You can change a name, but no, a name can only be used one time. And so once you have used a name and that name, you go to change the name or say you added a second emission unit, that's, or something similar to it, you remove boiler 1, but you wanted to add a new boiler 1, you cannot use boiler 1 a second time.
Great, thanks for that, Janelle. Lauren, I think we are all set to have you take us home.
Okay. I am going to share my screen again, and then we are going to go over back. As I stated, if you are a new site, within MiEnviro means you've never done business with air quality before, and I will show you how to set up a site. So you would click down to start a new form. And we want to start a new application because, as you can see in the smaller words, it also talks about entrance into a program, which should be air quality. So I'm going to select this arrow. And as you saw before, the sticky filter, since we're back in here, it kept that I was searching for new permits. So I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to select, I know it's new air. So I'm going to type in new, air, site request. And so to start a new site, we would click begin. And here is the pop-up. And we want to make sure we're not submitting this form for PTI training site. We're going to create a new site. So I'm going to say create new site. It's very important to add the new site name, just as you would on a PTI application form or paper form right now, because this is going to be that name for the new site. So if you do not want any abbreviations, please do not put any abbreviations here. Make sure your spelling is correctly. Be very thorough when filling this information out. So I am just going to call this test site and hit continue. Again, it takes you to the instructions page, and you just say, I want to point out this caution. You do not want to start another form associated with the site you're trying to create, such as a permit to install application or a submission package, until after you receive notification that this request has been accepted and the new site has been entered into MiEnviro system. So we're going to begin form. And here you would add the site address. You can validate the address, the county that it's in, the primary ownership type, which is asking if it's federal, local government, private, state, tribal. So I'm just going to say it's state really quick. I'm going to put Constitutional Hall in here just so you can see what it looks like when we do submit this form, which is in Inga County. I'm just going to type in a couple of numbers, and as you can see, it does fill in based off of that search you had. So we're just going to select one, and then here you want your facility description. So I'm just going to say test site, but here try to be a little more detailed than just test. Talk about what your facility does so we understand when reviewing the site. And then if it's a portable site, and if it is, the definition of portable site is still the same as it has been before. Definitions are not, the definitions and abbreviations are not changing other than the ones that we had talked about this morning that are new to us. So if it is portable, it's just making sure that you put the mailing address up here. And then the site location should be the initial location of your portable equipment. So you would come down to this map and you would type in the address again. And the reason this is so that it can pre-populate your longitude and latitude. So that automatically populated for us. If you know it, you can type that in as well. And then a reminder, do not fill out another site until you have acceptance. You have received your notification, and we say review. And all forms have a review spot where you can review it. It's not editable to make sure everything you entered is correct. And then you would go down to certify and submit. And this is just letting you know that you have no knowledge of the site already being there, and you submit your form. And now here you can print your confirmation, you can view the submission, it will be non-editable, and then, or you can return back to MiEnviro portal home. So I'm just gonna select return back. And that is how you get a new site. But again, do not submit any other forms until you receive back, because as I stated, AQD will review those. AQD will assign it an SRN, a state registration number, and you need that SRN to have that connection with our equipment module, or the application equipment inventory form slice, as we may call it as well. And you need that connection because you to be able to fill out the rest of your submission packages. As you saw, that was a required form. So if you start it before then, you may lose all of that information without having that connection piece. Now that we went over that, I just want to go back to the PowerPoint and talk about what outcomes, what should you have learned today? And this will be, what is a new site versus an existing site in MiEnviro? Again, an existing site is somebody who has done business with air quality before. All that information has been migrated. As I talked about in our last training, there's lots of documents that have been migrating. So if you have done business with the air AQD and you're not seeing your existing site, please reach out, or there may be a letter coming to you soon. A new site is somebody who has never done business with us before, and they would have to use that form we just went over to create a new site within MiEnviro. Again, do not start any other forms until you have received notification we have accepted that site. The other thing we should have, hopefully we talked about, is understanding which PTI submission package to submit, your new versus your modification. Today we went over how to start a submission package for a new permit. Again, that's somebody that is installing a new piece of equipment or a brand new facility, a new piece of equipment or a new emission unit. Or if you are making a modification to an existing emission unit that does not have an in effect permit status, you would need to use the new permit. And we'll go over modification. We'll show you how to start that submission package once you have a permit that's in that in effect status. The other thing we showed you today was how to navigate from a PTI submission package to the AEI form, and then going back to the submission package. So how to use those two different components. And with that, Caitlin, I will turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lauren. If you want to go to the next slide, I just want to, before we get into questions and answers, I know we have a lot, just recap where you can find a bunch of our resources. So if you go to michigan.gov/MiEnviro-Air, that's where you're going to find all of our air specific user guides or links to the additional user guides. So all of our general information is housed there, and that's where you will find our recordings as well of these trainings. And then getting to the permit specific information that Lauren and Janelle were talking about, you're going to want to scroll further down and go to that permit webpage for that permit to install user guide. You can also access that through your user account, as Lauren showed you beforehand. So lastly is, I just want to highlight our upcoming trainings. So we have part 2 this afternoon at 1 o'clock. It's going to really build upon this session and get deeper into some of those forms that hopefully should answer some of the questions that I know people were putting into the question and answer box about specific forms. We will get into some of those this afternoon in part 2. And then the PTI portion of our MiEnviro for Air web series will conclude in January, which will have our general PTIs and our training for the crushing specific industry on the 9th. Lauren, if you want to go to the next slide, I just want to put up some contact information. If you still have questions, feel free to send those to our eagle-air-myenviro@michigan.gov email address that is monitored by several AQD staff, and we will get you the information as best we can. And then you can also send your permit-related questions to Lauren, Janelle, and Dave Thompson as well, if you have questions that are permit specific. So with that, I'm going to jump back into some of the questions that we have here in the chat for the last 9 minutes that we have together this morning. So the first question that I want to get in here for you, Lauren, maybe this will go to you. It's about confidential information. So you really hit that home. So the question is, should confidential equipment info or spec sheets be uploaded only into that confidential section, or should they upload that elsewhere? I think you covered that, but.
Yes, all confidential information that you are considering confidential should only be in that confidential attachment, and it should have the name confidential in the beginning of the file name. So we know when reviewing the attachments exactly what is considered confidential. It should not be attached anywhere else.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Lauren. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit into making corrections and changes. So question came in about, let's say a source is filling out the PSD applicability section and made a couple of mistakes on checking the boxes. So obviously we know MiEnviro is new since we went live with it yesterday. How can those be fixed without getting the application just rejected? So I know we're going to talk about correction requests, but could you give us a little bit more, maybe just quick details on that?
Yeah, so we will have a process in the system called correction requests where we can go specifically to each question and attach a correction request. Sorry, words are hard. And letting you know exactly what needs to be changed. I would say it's case by case, saying it depends on how much information is missing, just like it would be right now with our paper forms. If there's a lot of information missing, we will just return it back to the applicant. And then they can submit it once they have everything. And kind of the same thing, if there's just a couple of things missing, or we are a little uncertain about maybe the questions where like, maybe they answered this wrong. It doesn't, based on our information of the site, we expected it to be answered slightly different. Then we may reach out to you and just send correction requests. And I will go over that this afternoon.
Perfect. Thanks, Lauren. So kind of sticking with that whole, like, what information is needed so people make sure they have as much as possible so they don't get a correction request is, do we have any sort of way to get a list of the required information for each form, but without going into the system, or so that people can plan early for the permitting process to ensure that they've collected the required information to get to you guys as the engineers beforehand? Or how would you suggest they go about doing something like that?
That's a great question. I would suggest actually just going into the system, starting the submission package, and viewing the forms that way. You can always delete a submission package if you're just using it for informational purposes. The reason I suggest this is because, as you saw, there is some configuration depending on how you answer some questions, what other questions may pop up. For an example, if you're not subject to PSD or doing a PSD applicability, none of those required fields would be available where you're needing to fill them out. So that is our recommendation. This afternoon, we'll only go through a couple of forms, but if you need to look through others, feel free to go in there and review them and look at them. And you can delete a submission package without submitting it.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Lauren. Hopefully that helps those people planning out their projects. We definitely encourage planning out their projects and doing any sort of pre-application meeting with the permit staff as well. Sticking with that a little bit about the forms and making sure they have everything. So the question is, if on the off chance that an application is rejected by the permit staff, are all those forms wiped out, or can they go back in and reuse those forms?
That is a good question. If a submission package is rejected, it will not come back to the applicant, and they will have to start with a brand new set of forms. You'd have to start a brand new submission package. All that information that you have provided to us will no longer be available to edit. So it's very important to submit these and including the required information, which is why we do have the questions that are required, guiding you to submit the correct information that we will need for our review.
Perfect. And they can also still reach out to the permit staff and ask those questions to preemptively not get their application rejected, or use that PTI workbook, which is still available online. That's got a lot of additional detail on what some of those questions may mean. Keeping with a little bit some of those sections of that form that you were filling out. So a question came in about how would you change a contact information for a person if they've left the organization or retired, but they were the primary contact when the application was submitted, but they do that before the permit was issued. Is that something they can easily go in and change?
Yeah, you can just reach out to us. Phone, email still is very available, and we can send you back a correction request asking you to change that name if it's somebody who needs to be updated into the system.
Great, really good questions coming in here on the chat. So definitely appreciate everybody putting those in there. What I did want to highlight here is Janelle was talking about that pre-operating status. And I know that's a new status for those of you who have reported emissions before. So the question was, if you select that pre-operating status because the permit was approved and the emission unit operates for testing in December for the reporting year, it's asking about what emissions need to be reported. So I'm going to say that we will cover that pre-operating status and emissions that need to be reported associated with that, since that is new in our emissions reporting training. Our emission reporting training is in January. So if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about that, be sure to register for that emissions reporting training second week of January. Another question is, maybe Janelle, this one might be for you. It's going back to when you're adding some equipment into the equipment inventory module. So question is, what if you are adding in a single piece of equipment to an emission unit that is actually made up of a group of equipment? So the example is they're adding in one mixer to EU solvent mixers 1 through 4. So should they be actually adding those in as mixers 1, 2, 3, and 4, or how would they enter something like that in?
That's a great question. We would, however you would permit it now and submit the application now with our policy and procedure that talks about what an emission unit is, that would be how I would recommend doing it in the system. If it makes sense to have it as EU mixers 1 through 4, then go ahead and submit it that way. The way you would look at permitting emission units isn't changing.
Perfect. Okay, last question we're going to ask, because we're bumping up to time here, is can you confirm one more time that Word and Excel doc files that are zipped, that are sent through MiEnviro, are those shared to the public?
If they are not considered confidential, yes, they would be shared with the public, and they would have the functionality, if it's in a zip file, of a Word document and Excel document. They will not be converted to PDF.
Okay, thanks for that, Lauren. So there are quite a few questions that I know we didn't have time to get to. So we do have a list of these questions, and we will get back with you on these questions. So please, people be aware that we will get to your questions and get them addressed directly with you, as we do have your contact information since you registered for this training. So Janelle, Lauren, thank you so much for presenting today. We will get this recording out to you guys here probably in the next day or so. It'll be posted to our website, and we hope to see you back this afternoon for part 2. Thanks so much, and I hope everybody has a good rest of your morning. Take care.